Why was no one listening to her? The briefing room buzzed with overlapping voices, maps scattered across the table like broken promises. Senior officers pointed at arrows, circled zones, and spoke of tactics with the heavy certainty of men who had memorized too many textbooks but touched too little dirt. Each word layered over the next, louder, sharper, meant to sound decisive, meant to inspire confidence. And yet in the far corner she sat silent, the only woman in the room, the only one who had walked the ground they were about to enter. She leaned back in her chair, eyes lowered as if uninterested. But her mind was wide awake, replaying the streets, the heat, the way shadows bent in that particular village at night. Every turn had its rhythm. Every rooftop had its echo. She knew it like muscle memory. And watching them now, she felt the first ripple of dread. They didn't see it. No one noticed her move when she reached for her notebook. No one noticed her draw a single line through their plan, neat and silent. She already knew where it would fail. She knew because she had lived it before. The commander, gray-haired, thick voice, slammed his fist down, calling for commitment. We go in fast, we overwhelm, shock and pressure. That's how we win. A murmur of agreement, heads nodding. She scribbled a word in her notebook, trap. Her chest tightened. The moment pressed her, urging her to speak, but she didn't. She had learned long ago, the louder the table, the less it listened, so she kept the word to herself. And maybe that was the curse, or the gift. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped, voices scattered, boots stomped toward the exit. She stayed seated for a beat longer, fingers resting on the notebook. Then she closed it, tucked it under her arm, and rose without a sound. One man noticed her, not the commander, not the strategists. A boy barely old enough to hide the tremor in his hands. A sergeant, 22, eyes shadowed with the kind of fear no uniform could hide. He watched her walk out, his jaw tight. Something about her stillness unsettled him. Because she had said nothing, and yet he felt she knew something they didn't. Outside, the evening heat pressed down, heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of oil and dust, the kind of smell that clings to the skin and refuses to leave. She paused under the dying light, tying her hair back with slow precision, buying herself a moment of stillness. Her thoughts wandered, unbidden, to the letter. The letter that had pulled her back here, months after she had promised herself never again. Her brother's unit, missing, names unspoken, details hidden under classified. But the coordinates, the mission zone, they overlapped too closely with his last known trail. So here she was, not because she trusted the mission, not because she trusted these men, but because she couldn't let her brother's shadow disappear without trying. She hadn't told them. She wouldn't. To them, she was just a silent operator, another set of boots, another rifle. They didn't need to know why she was here. But she carried it, every breath, every step. Night fell like a curtain. The base shifted into a hum of preparation. Soldiers laced boots, checked weapons, whispered jokes that sounded more like fear disguised as bravado. The sound of metal on metal echoed sharp in the air. She moved through it all quietly, vest strapped tight, gloves pulled snug. Her hands were steady, but her chest was a battlefield of its own. She remembered the last time she geared up like this. The last time she told herself she could handle it. The last time she lost someone because of it. And still she pulled the strap tighter. On the transport, engines roared beneath them, rattling the floor. The men around her sat rigid, trying not to show nerves. Some muttered to themselves, others stared into nothing, lips moving in prayers no one else could hear. The young sergeant sat across from her, his rifle resting against his knee. He kept glancing, as if wanting to ask something but holding back. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice a whisper barely cutting through the engine's drone. "You ever done this before?" Her eyes lifted, steady, calm, the kind of calm that unnerved him more than any answer could. "Once or twice," she said softly. He nodded too quickly, as if satisfied. But he was. He didn't know she had carried more missions than she ever wanted to admit. Missions that carved scars deeper than skin. Missions where silence was the only thing she carried home. The transport jolted, landing rough. The back door yawned open. Night air rushed in hot, dry, laced with dust. Boots hit the ground. The mission began. The first hour moved smooth. Too smooth. The lead team advanced quickly, cutting through streets, their confidence loud in the way they moved. She followed at the rear, eyes scanning rooftops, ears tuned not to the noise but to the absence of it. Silence had a weight, and this silence was too heavy. A wrong turn, too sharp, too eager. She knew it the second they took it. The alley they avoided was the one she had marked in her mind, the safe path, the one no one else saw. Static hit the radios, then shouts, gunfire. The night cracked open, sharp and brutal. Chaos bled into the comms, orders tangled, half-heard, lost in panic. The plan was unraveling, just like she had written in her notebook. Men ducked, cursed, scrambled for cover. The commander barked orders, but his voice was drowned by gunfire. She stood still, breathing steady. Her eyes caught the narrow street, the same one she had walked before, the same one that offered a way out if only anyone believed it. No one was looking, no one was listening. So she moved. One step, then another, quiet, measured, not running, not rushing, just moving as if the chaos around her didn't exist. A soldier noticed, confusion flared. Where the hell is she going? But she didn't answer. She couldn't. She knew the choice was hers alone. The young sergeant's eyes locked on her. Something in her calm pulled him. He hesitated, then followed. Not because he trusted her, but because something in him whispered she was the only steady thing in the storm. 2 more followed, then 3. By the time the rest realized, half the team was slipping after her, pulled not by orders, not by command, but by silence. The commander's voice raged in their ears, but the men didn't turn back. Because in the middle of panic, they saw her move without fear. And for the first time, they believed her silence might mean something. She didn't look back, didn't speak, didn't need to. She knew the streets, she knew the rhythm. She knew where hope still lived. And though no one had noticed her at the table here in the night, every eye turned. Because she had moved. And nothing would be the same after. How long could silence lead men who had been trained only to follow orders? The question lingered in her chest as she stepped deeper into the alley. The narrow walls swallowed the chaos behind them, muffling the shouting, the gunfire, the commander's voice still barking through static-filled radios. Here, the sound was different, softer. The wind carried only dust and the distant thrum of something unseen. Her boots pressed against cracked stone, careful, measured. The alley smelled of smoke and old oil. A memory tugged at her, a different night, years ago, her brother walking ahead of her in this same kind of silence. His back straight, his stride easy, his voice low as he whispered directions only she could hear. "Trust the shadows," he had said once. "They see more than the light ever will." Now he was gone, or maybe not. Maybe he was just beyond the next street. That thought kept her moving, each step pulling her deeper into the maze. Behind her, the young sergeant followed close, his breathing quick but his step steady. He didn't speak, but she felt his eyes on her back, searching for a reason, searching for proof he wasn't walking blindly into the dark. The others trailed in uneasy silence. Doubt clung to them, heavy as the night. One soldier finally whispered, his voice trembling against the quiet. "This isn't the plan." She didn't turn, didn't answer. Because words would have broken it. The fragile thread she held them by wasn't logic, wasn't strategy. It was trust, thin, unspoken, and easily shattered. She lifted her hand, palm open, fingers spread. A silent signal, stop. They froze. Ahead the street opened wider, lit faintly by a single hanging bulb swaying in the breeze. The wires crackled faintly above, sending sparks into the darkness. She lowered her body, pressing into the wall, eyes scanning. The rhythm of the street told her what she already suspected. A trap was waiting. She heard it before she saw it, the faint scrape of boots on gravel, the muffled metallic click of weapons being readied in the shadows above. The enemy wasn't where the commander had expected. They were here, waiting, silent hunters. Her heart beat slower, steadier, the way it always did when the moment sharpened. She motioned with her fingers, left, right, split. The men looked confused, but the sergeant, watching closely, mimicked her movement, pulling 2 men with him. The rest followed. A choice unfolded in front of her. She could wait, let the ambush spring and fight in the chaos. Or she could move now, cutting through before the trap snapped shut. She thought of her brother, of his laugh when plans failed, of his quiet confidence when everything else broke. "Don't wait," he used to say. "Waiting just gives the other side time to kill your hope." Her jaw tightened, she stepped forward. The bulb flickered overhead, light spilling across her face for a single heartbeat before plunging back into shadow. A whisper of movement stirred above. A rifle barrel shifted. She raised her weapon, but not to fire. Not yet. Her aim traced the rooftops, her finger resting lightly against the trigger. She didn't need to shoot first. She needed them to see her. And they did. A figure leaned too far, eyes catching hers. For a breath, they stared at each other across the dark divide. His weapon lifted. Hers didn't flinch. That pause, that hesitation, was all her team needed. The sergeant fired first. A crack split the night. The enemy stumbled, fell from the rooftop, crashing hard into the dirt. Shouts erupted above, confusion tearing through the trap. Her silence had bought them seconds. And seconds were life. Gunfire lit the street in bursts of orange and white. Bullets shattered stone, glass rained down from broken windows. Her team scattered into the shadows, returning fire with desperate bursts. The young sergeant shouted orders that weren't his to give, but no one corrected him because no one else was giving them. She moved low, precise, her steps weaving between bursts of light and shadow. Her rifle barked once, twice, never wasted, each shot measured. But even in the storm, her mind stayed tethered to something else. Her brother. Where was he? Was he somewhere in this chaos, a prisoner in one of these buildings? Or was she chasing a ghost, bleeding herself out for a hope already buried? The thought threatened to slow her. She pushed it down, focus, one step, one breath. The firefight dragged longer than expected. The enemy pressed harder, disciplined, their positions calculated. This wasn't random resistance, this was planned. She realized with a chill that the commander's route wasn't just flawed, it had been predicted. Someone had known. When the last shot faded, silence collapsed heavy over the street. Smoke lingered, acrid and thick, curling into lungs like poison. The men shifted uneasily, their adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. One soldier cursed under his breath. Another sat hard against the wall, his chest heaving. The sergeant approached her. His face was streaked with dust, his eyes wide with the aftershock of survival. He swallowed hard. "If you hadn't moved," he didn't finish. He didn't need to. She didn't answer, she didn't need thanks. But inside, a different storm raged. Why had no one else seen it? Why had she been the only one to sense the trap? Unless someone hadn't wanted to. She felt the weight of that suspicion settle cold in her gut. The team regrouped, shaken, uncertain. Radios still crackled faintly with the commander's voice, demanding updates, his tone harsh, angry. But no one answered him. Not yet. Not after what had just happened. Instead, they looked at her. It wasn't unanimous. Doubt still lingered. Some eyes accused, some feared, some demanded answers she wouldn't give. But for the first time, the silence around her wasn't absence. It was weight, presence. She exhaled slowly, her gaze lifting to the rooftops where shadows still lingered. Somewhere in those shadows was the reason she had come. Somewhere, maybe, was her brother. But there was something else too, something darker. Someone wanted them here. and she intended to find out who. The night stretched long ahead. The mission was broken, the plan shattered. But now, whether they admitted it or not, the men were tied to her steps. She started walking. No words, no orders. Just movement. And they followed. Because silence, once ignored, had become the only thing they trusted. What do you do when every step forward feels like it might be the one that kills you? That thought hung heavy in the team's silence as they followed her deeper into the city's broken veins. The firefight had left them raw, their nerves stripped bare, but no one dared to question her path now. Not openly, not after the trap they had narrowly escaped. The streets narrowed again, winding like arteries through a body that had been wounded too many times. Rubble littered the ground, shattered bricks, broken doors, the remains of lives that had once filled these homes. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance, the sound sharp, urgent, then cut off too quickly. She slowed, lifting her hand. A signal, the men froze. Their breaths puffed in faint clouds, the night air cooler here, almost damp. She tilted her head, listening. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and unnatural. No movement, no voices. That was wrong. Places like this always breathed, even in danger. Someone should have been here, a cough, a whisper, a door creaking under weight. But it was empty. Too empty. She crouched, brushing her fingers lightly against the dirt. Dust lifted, untouched for hours. No fresh prints, no recent passing. Yet the firefight they just endured meant the enemy had been here, close. Her stomach tightened. This emptiness wasn't accident, it was choice. Behind her, the sergeant whispered, "What do you see?" His voice trembled, low enough that only she could hear. She didn't answer. She let the silence hold, her eyes sweeping the shadows. Her pulse stayed steady, her breathing slow. But inside, her mind churned. She thought of her brother again, his voice teasing her for always analyzing too much. But he was the one who taught her to look for what wasn't there, not just what was. And right now, what wasn't there was louder than any gunfire. The soldier who had spoken earlier, the one who questioned her path, shifted nervously, gripping his rifle too tight. "This is madness," he muttered. "We should go back to command, regroup." The sergeant shot him a look. Regroup into what? Their plan nearly got us all killed. The man didn't respond. But his jaw clenched, and in his eyes burned the quiet anger of someone who wanted to believe in orders, in structure, in the safety of doing what was expected. She watched it all without speaking. She could feel the fracture forming in the group. Fear had a way of splitting men, turning them against one another, and in silence, fear grew teeth. She needed to cut it before it cut them. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the small circle of faces. Some avoided her eyes. Others clung to them as if her steadiness might anchor their own. She spoke finally, her voice low, steady, and colder than the night air. "You saw what happened. If you want to walk back, do it. But the next trap is already waiting, and this time there won't be enough silence left to save you." Her words hit harder than she expected, because they knew she was right. No one moved. She nodded once and turned back, moving again. They followed. The street bent into a wider square, its center dominated by a fountain long dried, its stone cracked and chipped. The moonlight caught the jagged edges, making them gleam faintly like broken glass. She stopped at the edge, scanning the open space. Her breath caught. There, in the dirt near the fountain, half buried under dust and ash, lay something small. She moved closer, crouching, her fingers brushing it free. A patch, worn, torn at the edges, faded colors but unmistakable. Her brother's unit. The world narrowed around her. The voices of the men faded, the air thinned. For a moment all she saw was that patch, all she felt was the weight of its fabric against her skin. He had been here. The realization hit like a surge of fire through her veins. Proof. Not just rumor, not just classified words hidden behind glass walls. He had been here, and maybe still was. But if he had been here, then the emptiness around them was no coincidence. Someone had erased this place. Someone had cleared it. Her throat tightened. She rose slowly, pocketing the patch, her face unreadable. The sergeant noticed, his eyes narrowing. "What was that?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. Not yet. She couldn't tell them. Not until she knew more. Not until she could carry it without it breaking her. But her silence again pulled at him. He didn't push. Not yet. They moved on. The further they walked, the heavier the night became. Their radios hissed with fragments of the commander's voice, anger, confusion, demands. But no one raised theirs to respond. The connection to command had frayed, replaced now by something more fragile, more dangerous, trust in her. And trust was harder to carry than orders. The soldier who had doubted her earlier finally snapped. He broke from the group, stepping ahead, his rifle swinging loosely in frustration. "This is insane," he hissed. "We're following her into nothing. She's not even saying where we're going. We don't even know if she's right." The sergeant's voice cut sharp. "She's kept us alive." "For how long?" the man shot back. "You think that lasts forever? She doesn't answer, she doesn't explain. For all we know, she's leading us into." "Enough." Her voice sliced through the night, low, firm, final. The man froze, the others stared. She stepped closer, her eyes locking on his, not angry, not pleading, just steady. "If you want words, go back. If you want life, follow." The silence after was heavy. He swallowed hard, his jaw twitching. Then he stepped back, his shoulders tight with resentment, but he didn't leave. She turned away. She couldn't afford division, not now. But inside she felt the cost of every word. She hated speaking. Hated how words broke the silence she had built around herself like armor. But sometimes silence wasn't enough. They pressed forward again, the streets twisting tighter, the shadows bending around them. Her senses sharpened with every step. Her brother's patch burned in her pocket, a silent weight. At the edge of another alley she stopped suddenly. She raised her hand again. The men froze. She had heard it, faint, barely there. A voice. Not enemy, not local. American. It came again, weak, hoarse, a whisper cutting through the night. "Help." Her chest constricted. The men stiffened, rifles lifting, eyes darting. She moved forward alone, her steps silent as breath. The voice came again, closer now, echoing from the shadows of a collapsed doorway. She raised her rifle, heart pounding, each beat a hammer against her ribs. And then she saw him. Not her brother, but one of his men. Barely alive, slumped against the broken wall, blood dark on his uniform, his face pale, eyes sunken. He looked up, blinking weakly at her. "You," his lips cracked, his voice rasped. Too late. The words cut deeper than any bullet. She dropped to her knees, pressing close, her hands steady as she checked his wounds. The men closed in around them, their faces pale in the dim light. The soldier coughed, his breath rattling. His eyes searched hers, desperate, fatting. It was a setup. Her pulse froze. "Your brother," his voice cracked, breaking into silence. Her heart slammed. She shook him lightly, desperate for more, but his head fell to the side, his chest stilled. The world went quiet. Her brother set up. The patch in her pocket burned like fire. And in that silence she knew the mission wasn't broken by accident. It had been designed to fail. The night sky stretched above them, blank and unforgiving. No stars pierced through the thick shroud of clouds. The jungle that surrounded their makeshift camp seemed alive, breathing, whispering, testing their resolve with every sound. The soldiers sat in small groups, rifles cradled close, eyes darting between the shadows. They were weary, hungry, and restless, yet none of them dared close their eyes for more than a few minutes. And at the center of it all she sat by the dim glow of a single lantern, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The faint rasping sound echoed in the silence, steady and unbroken, like a heartbeat that reminded everyone she was still there. Their commander, their protector, their burden. Alina's face was unreadable, though her mind was anything but calm. She felt the tension pressing on her from all sides, an invisible weight. These soldiers, broken men, hardened killers, frightened conscripts, were not bound to her by loyalty, not yet. They were bound only by survival, and survival was fragile. Trust had to be earned. Tonight, she knew, would test whether they stood with her or against her. The first signs came with the whispers. She caught them drifting between the men as they huddled in small knots, their words low but sharp. They spoke in their own tongue, but Alina had learned enough of their fractured dialects to catch the meaning. She leads us into death. She is human, not one of us. She will sacrifice us. Her eyes narrowed, though she kept her posture calm. She had expected this. The weight of command was never carried by orders alone. It required proof, blood, and unshakable presence. When one of the men stood, packing too quickly, too agitated, Alina's hand drifted subtly to the knife at her hip. It wasn't fear that gripped her, it was readiness. The man, thin, gaunt, with eyes that had seen too many nights without rest, raised his voice, louder than the whispering winds. "We follow her and we die here," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger in her direction. "She has no tribe, no allegiance. Why should we bleed for her?" The others stirred, glancing between him and their commander. The air thickened with the scent of revolt. Alina rose slowly, her movements deliberate, commanding silence without a single word. She let the lantern light catch her face, casting sharp shadows across her features. Her voice, when it came, was low but cutting, carrying weight without the need to shout. "You think I brought you here to die?" she asked. "No, I brought you here to live." The man spat into the dirt. "Live, we have no food, no allies, we are hunted, you lead us into traps." For a moment, the jungle seemed to lean in, waiting for her answer. Alina stepped forward, closing the distance between them, her eyes locked on his, unblinking, unwavering. "You call me human as if it makes me weak. But listen to me, your tribes, your banners, your commanders, they abandoned you. You bleed for no one now but me." She pressed her palm against her chest. "I bleed with you. Every step you take, I take. Every risk I share. Every death I carry." Her voice hardened. "If you doubt me, then challenge me, right here, right now." The camp froze. The man stiffened, his bravado faltering under the intensity of her stare. He had not expected the invitation. No one had. Alina drew her knife, the blade gleaming faintly in the lantern light. She tossed it at his feet, the steel biting into the dirt with a sharp thud. "Take it," she said. "If you believe you should lead, prove it. But understand this, if you strike at me, you better not miss, because I will not show mercy." The silence was suffocating. Every soldier watched, breaths held, as the man bent slowly, trembling hand reaching for the knife. For a heartbeat, Alina wondered if he would do it, if tonight her command would end in blood. But then his hand hovered above the hilt, fingers twitching, and he stopped. His eyes flicked up to meet hers. What he saw there, steel, fire, and certainty, made his hand recoil. He straightened, shaking his head, his voice cracked. I cannot." Alina stepped forward, closing the distance in a single stride. She snatched the knife from the ground and pressed it into his chest, not hard enough to pierce, but enough to remind him of what could have been. "You chose to live," she said softly, so only he could hear. "Remember that choice. Follow me and you will see dawn. Betray me and you will not." The man stumbled back, nodding frantically. The others lowered their eyes, some ashamed, others relieved. The tension snapped like a bowstring cut loose. Alina turned, sweeping her gaze over them all. "No more whispers," she said, her tone final, ringing with authority. "You may doubt me in your hearts, but in your actions you will follow, together or not at all." That night, as the men finally settled into uneasy rest, Alina sat awake by the fire. Her blade rested across her knees, her eyes scanning the jungle, but her thoughts turned inward. Command was not about orders, it was about belief. She had not won them fully tonight, but she had planted the seed. And she knew the truth: loyalty born of fear would not last. She would need to give them more. She would need to show them why her path was worth walking. The jungle answered with a sudden sound, a rustle in the undergrowth, too deliberate to be the wind. Elena's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. She rose silently, motioning for two men closest to her to follow. They crept toward the noise, rifles raised, breaths shallow. The air grew heavy, charged. Then from the darkness a figure emerged, slender, cloaked, eyes glinting with unnatural light. A scout. Elena's chest tightened. If scouts were here, the hunters were not far behind. Their enemies had found their trail. The figure hissed something in a tongue Elena didn't recognize and turned to flee. But she was faster. In one fluid motion, she lunged, pinning the scout to the ground with her blade at his throat. His eyes widened, but he did not cry out. The two soldiers with her looked to Elena, waiting. She studied the scout, her mind racing. Killing him would silence him, but it would also confirm what the others feared, that she was a butcher, no different than the monsters they had fled. Sparing him risked their lives, but it might also show her men a different path. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Elena's decision came in a whisper. She pressed her blade harder against the scout's skin, just enough to draw a single drop of blood, then leaned close. "Run," she said, her voice steady, dangerous. "Tell your masters the jungle is ours, and if they follow, they will bleed for every step they take." The scout's breath hitched. For a moment, his eyes flickered with fear and something else, something like recognition. Then he scrambled to his feet and vanished into the dark. Elena turned back to her men, who stood frozen in disbelief. "You see," she said, her voice firm, "we are not prey, we are the storm." For the first time, the faintest spark lit in their eyes. Not full loyalty, not yet, but something closer, something dangerous, something alive. When they returned to camp, the soldiers looked at her differently. Some still with suspicion, but others with a glimmer of respect. The man who had nearly challenged her earlier avoided her gaze, but his silence spoke volumes. As dawn broke, pale light spilling across the treetops, Elena rose and faced them all. "The hunters come," she declared. "But we are no longer running. Tonight we become the shadow they fear. Tonight they learn who we are." And as the first rays of morning touched their faces, the men, fractured, weary, broken, stood a little straighter. The test of loyalty had begun. But Elena knew the real trial was yet to come. The jungle was no friend. By dawn, it revealed its true face. Mist curled low over the undergrowth, shrouding every shadow and uncertainty. The soldiers moved in a staggered line, rifles raised, eyes scanning the trees as though the forest itself had grown hostile. The air clung to their skin, thick, wet, suffocating, dampening their every step. Every sound, from the snap of a twig to the echo of a bird's cry, sent their nerves into sharp edges. Elena led them, her face grim, her senses tuned to every vibration in the air. She had been here before in lands like these, where nature itself was a predator, and hesitation meant death. She knew the signs, and she had seen them all night. Bent leaves where something heavy had passed, trails in the soil that belonged to no harmless creature, the faint metallic tang that told her scouts were not far. Her men followed because they had no choice. Yet in the taut silence between their breaths, Elena felt their thoughts pressing against her. Fear, distrust, a growing unease that loyalty could not yet conquer. They had survived the confrontation in camp, but now the forest itself seemed intent on testing the fragile bond she had begun to weave. By mid-morning, the mist began to thin and the sun cut through the canopy in broken shards of light. The illusion of safety returned. A few men relaxed, their shoulders loosening, their steps less guarded. That was when the first trap snapped shut. A sudden whip echoed through the jungle as a hidden snare lashed up, yanking one of the soldiers off the ground. His scream tore through the stillness as he dangled upside down, thrashing, his rifle falling into the underbrush. The others panicked. Shouts rang out, weapons raised, eyes darting everywhere at once. "Hold," Elena barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. She raised her fist, signaling silence, then approached the trap with slow, deliberate steps. Her knife sliced through the tensioned vine in a single stroke, and the man dropped hard to the ground. He groaned, dazed but alive. She turned, eyes sweeping the trees. The trap was old, not newly set, yet it meant only one thing. "We are not alone," she said. "They're testing us, watching us." The forest fell silent, as though confirming her words. The next hours blurred into a relentless test of endurance. More traps appeared, pitfalls disguised beneath leaves, sharpened stakes hidden where a foot might fall, poisoned darts loosed by unseen hands. Each one came closer than the last, each one proving their unseen enemy was not only patient, but precise. The soldiers began to unravel. Every snapped twig made them flinch. Every shadow seemed a hunter's outline. "They're playing with us," one muttered, voice cracking. "They want us to fear the forest." "They already have," another whispered. Elena heard it all. She let them speak, let their fears surface, because silence could be more dangerous than words. Yet inside, her own heart pounded. This was more than harassment. This was psychological warfare, and the jungle was their enemy's greatest weapon. By late afternoon, the first casualty fell. A sharp whistle split the air, followed by the hiss of something slicing through leaves. Before Elena could shout a warning, a soldier at the rear of the column dropped, clutching his neck. Blood seeped between his fingers. A dart, small and deadly, jutted out. His eyes widened, glassy with terror, then dimmed as his body went still. The line broke. Panic surged like wildfire. "They've found us," someone screamed. "We're surrounded." Chaos erupted, men firing blindly into the trees, bullets ripping through foliage, echoes bouncing back like taunts. Birds scattered in a frenzy above, the jungle exploding with noise. Elena's voice cut through it like steel. "Cease fire, hold your line." But fear had already taken hold. One man bolted into the trees, abandoning his weapon, running as if distance could save him. Another fell to his knees, trembling, muttering prayers in a language Elena could not understand. For a moment it seemed the entire column would shatter, dissolve into madness. Elena acted. She stormed into the center of the chaos, shoving rifles down, forcing eyes to meet hers. She grabbed the man who prayed, lifting his chin until his gaze locked on hers. "You think death is coming," she hissed. "Then face it with me, don't crawl, stand." She turned to the others, her voice rising, sharp as a blade. "You fire into shadows and you waste your strength. You run and you die alone. But if you stand with me, if you trust me, then the hunters will bleed before we do." Her words hit them like a jolt, not all at once but enough. Rifles lowered, shouts stilled. The man on his knees rose unsteadily, clinging to her words as though they were a lifeline. It was not victory, it was survival, but it was enough to hold them together for one more hour. That hour brought them to the river. It carved through the jungle like a wound, the water dark and swift, swollen from rains. The far bank loomed 30 feet away, its trees bending inward as though guarding a secret. The men stared at it with hollow eyes. "We can't cross," one muttered. "The current will take us." Elena studied the river. She saw the truth in their fear. Crossing would be dangerous. But she also saw something else. The hunters' trail ended here. They had been driving the soldiers toward this river deliberately, herding them into a trap. She crouched, dipping her hand into the rushing water. Cold, unforgiving but crossable. Her decision came with no hesitation. "We cross tonight," she said. The men balked. Voices rose again, panic sharp in every syllable. "They'll kill us in the water. We'll drown before we reach the bank." Elena silenced them with a single word: "Enough." She straightened, her eyes burning with command. "You fear drowning, you fear death. Then hear this: death is already behind us. It follows in every shadow, every dart, every trap. There is no safety here, only forward, only through. She let the silence settle, then added softer, I will go first. If the river takes me, then you can turn back. But if I reach the other side, you will follow. Because I will not cross for myself, I will cross for us all. As dusk fell, Alina stepped into the river. The current seized her legs instantly, pulling, dragging, fighting to claim her. Every muscle in her body burned as she pushed forward inch by inch, her breath ragged. The roar of the water drowned out everything, her men's shouts, the hiss of wind, the pounding of her heart. For a moment she slipped. The current surged, dragging her under. Darkness filled her vision, water pressing into her lungs. She fought, kicking, clawing against the current, her body screaming in protest. And then light. She broke the surface, gasping, arms flailing until her fingers found a root jutting from the far bank. She clung to it, pulling herself up with a final, desperate strength. When she turned, soaked and shaking, she saw their faces on the far shore, wide-eyed, silent. One by one, they stepped into the river. The crossing was brutal. 2 men nearly went under before Alina dragged them to shore. Another lost his rifle to the current. But they made it. Against all odds, they all made it. For the first time, a ripple of belief spread through them. Not fear, not suspicion, but belief. She had led them through. She had crossed death itself to prove the way. Night fell hard, the jungle alive with hidden whispers. The men huddled close, their exhaustion profound, their trust fragile but growing. Alina sat apart, her body aching, her mind heavy with the weight of what was still to come. The hunters would not stop. The jungle would not relent. The river had bought them time, nothing more. Yet for the first time, she saw something in her men's eyes that had not been there before. Not just survival, not just fear. It was hope. And hope, she knew, was a weapon far sharper than any blade. But as the firelight flickered across their faces, Alina also knew this. Hope was fragile. The jungle had not finished with them yet. The true storm was still coming. The jungle didn't sleep. Even when the fire burned low and the soldiers drifted into uneasy rest, the forest stayed alive. Every rustle in the leaves carried a threat. Every chirp or whistle seemed too deliberate, too sharp. Even the wind, weaving through the trees, whispered warnings Alina couldn't ignore. She sat apart from the others, her rifle balanced across her knees, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. Her body begged for sleep. Her muscles trembled from the river's pull, her chest still ached with the memory of drowning. But she couldn't close her eyes. She knew better. The enemy had patience, inhuman patience, and they were still out there waiting. Behind her, the soldiers murmured in restless dreams. Some whimpered, their voices cracking with memories they thought buried. One muttered names, perhaps of family, perhaps of ghosts. Another sobbed quietly, unaware the sound escaped him. Alina listened, not with pity but with weight. Each sound was a reminder. These men were not machines. They were not expendable. They were sons, fathers, brothers, carrying stories no one would ever hear if this mission swallowed them whole. That was her burden, to carry not only her own scars but theirs. The first attack came just before dawn. A shadow darted through the tree line, swift, silent, a spark of movement too smooth to belong to the wind. Alina's instinct screamed. She lifted her rifle, firing a single shot into the dark. The crack shattered the stillness, echoing like thunder. A body dropped into the clearing, masked, faceless, collapsing inches from where the youngest soldier lay sleeping. Chaos exploded. The men jolted awake, fumbling for weapons, shouting over each other. But it was too late. More shadows burst from the trees, swift figures weaving through the mist. Gunfire erupted, deafening, frantic. Sparks flew as bullets struck metal traps hidden in the dirt. The air filled with smoke, screams, the smell of blood. Alina moved through it like water, calm, controlled. Her rifle barked, each shot purposeful, measured. She cut down one attacker then another, never wasting a bullet, never panicking. But for every enemy that fell, more seemed to emerge. The soldiers faltered. Fear clawed its way back into their hearts, threatening to unravel them. "Hold your line," Elena shouted, her voice steady even as the ground shook beneath their boots. One man froze, trembling too hard to aim. She shoved him aside, taking his position, firing into the darkness to buy him a second to breathe. Another soldier fell, a blade slicing across his shoulder. Elena tackled the attacker before he could finish the kill, her knife flashing, her breath hot against his mask as she drove steel into flesh. The fight was savage, primal. No orders, no structure, only survival. And then, just as quickly as it began, it ended. The attackers melted back into the trees, vanishing like ghosts. Silence crashed over the clearing, heavy and suffocating. The men stood in shock, their chests heaving, their eyes wide. 2 were wounded. 1 was dead. The fire smoldered low, casting broken light across the ground where blood mingled with dirt. Elena knelt beside the fallen soldier, her hand pressing gently to his cooling forehead. She didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Behind her, voices began again. Anger, accusation. "They knew where we were," one soldier spat. "They're watching us every step. This mission is cursed. We should have never left camp." Elena rose, her face unreadable. She let them vent, let the fire of their panic burn itself out. Then she spoke, her voice low, steady. "You think they'll stop if we run?" she asked. Her gaze cut through them, sharp, unwavering. "You think there's safety waiting back the way we came? No, safety doesn't exist. Not here, not in this mission. The only way through is forward, and the only way forward is together." Her words didn't erase their fear, but they planted something else, something fragile, something that could grow if given time. As daylight broke, they buried the fallen. No ceremony, no prayers, just silence. The earth swallowed another story, another life cut short by shadows. Elena stood apart, her eyes scanning the tree line. The enemy had tested them again, and again they had survived. But at what cost? How many more would fall before the truth revealed itself? She thought of her brother, of the way his laughter once cut through nights like these. He wouldn't have doubted, he wouldn't have hesitated. But then, he hadn't come back. The thought pierced deeper than any blade. They marched on. The jungle thickened, vines wrapping around their legs, branches clawing at their faces. The sun beat down, turning sweat into rivers across their skin. Hunger gnawed at them, water weighed heavy in their packs, exhaustion whispered temptations of surrender. But Elena never slowed. Every step forward was a choice, a declaration that the jungle would not claim them. Her silence became command. When she raised her hand, they stopped. When she knelt, they followed. Her body spoke what her lips did not, and slowly, painfully, they began to trust that language. The sergeant walked closest to her, watching her carefully. She felt his eyes, the unspoken questions building inside him. At last, when the others lagged behind, he spoke. "Why are you here?" he asked quietly. Elena didn't answer at first. Her eyes stayed on the path, her ears tuned to the forest, but his persistence pressed against her silence. Finally she exhaled, "Because I owe someone a promise." The sergeant waited, but she said no more, and he didn't ask again. By dusk, the forest broke open into a clearing, and there in the distance they saw it, a structure half buried in vines, its metal walls corroded by years, its roof caved in but still standing. The men froze, their breaths catching. It was no enemy camp, no trap, it was something else. A forgotten outpost. Elena's heart hammered. She knew this place. She had seen its maps, heard its stories whispered in classified reports. It was here long ago that her brother's unit had last signaled before vanishing. The jungle seemed to lean closer, watching, listening. Elena stepped forward, her eyes locked on the crumbling structure. The others hesitated, unease crawling across their faces. Is it safe? One asked. No, Alina said. Her voice was sharp, certain, but it's necessary. They entered the outpost as night swallowed the sky. The air inside was stale, heavy with mold and rust. Dust floated in the shafts of moonlight breaking through holes in the roof. Old cots lined the walls, torn and rotting. Weapons lay abandoned, their metal eaten by time. And yet something lingered, a weight, a silence that wasn't empty but full. The soldiers spread out, searching cautiously, their footsteps echoing too loudly. Every creak of wood felt like a scream in the stillness. Alina moved slower, her hand tracing the walls, her eyes catching faded markings. Symbols, numbers, a name scratched into the metal. Her brother's name. The breath caught in her throat. For a moment the world narrowed to that single word etched in steel, rough and desperate. He had been here. He had left this mark. Her knees nearly buckled. Memories surged. His smile, his voice, the way he always believed she was stronger than she thought. He had believed in her when no one else did. And now he was gone. But the mark was proof. Proof that he had fought, that he had lived, that his story had not been swallowed without trace. Alina pressed her palm against the name, her eyes closing. For the first time, a tear slipped down her cheek, carving a path through the dirt and sweat. Behind her, the sergeant's voice broke the silence. What is this place? Her voice cracked, soft but fierce. This is where the mission begins. That night, as the men rested uneasily within the outpost's crumbling walls, Alina sat awake, staring into the shadows. She knew the truth now. This was no coincidence. The enemy hadn't just been hunting them. They had been guiding them here, back to the place where her brother's story ended. The outpost wasn't sanctuary, it was bait. And she had walked them straight into it. Yet even as fear coiled in her chest, another thought took root. If the enemy wanted them here, then here was where she would break them. She rose slowly, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. Her brother's name still burned in her memory, carved into steel, carved into her heart. She would not fail him. Not now. Not ever. The jungle had tested them, and the enemy had haunted them. But the true fight was just beginning. And Alina, silent, scarred, unyielding, was ready. The city had grown silent after the long night. Smoke curled in slow spirals above collapsed rooftops, and the air tasted of steel and fire. The sun broke through fractured clouds, throwing its light onto broken streets where shadows of soldiers lingered. Amara stood with her rifle slung across her chest, her eyes scanning what had once been a proud square. Where fountains once poured clear water, now rubble lay in cracked stone basins. The people had not emerged yet, afraid, uncertain if the battle had truly ended. She knew better. This was not the end. It was the eye of the storm. Her team gathered behind her, each figure marked by exhaustion yet unyielding resolve. Kareem's uniform bore streaks of dried blood not his own. Ellis moved slower, his left shoulder wrapped in field bandages. Rafi carried the silence of the wounded, the kind where words were no longer needed to measure sacrifice. Intel says they're regrouping, Ellis said, wincing with every word. The North Sector. They want to retake the center before dawn tomorrow. Amara's gaze hardened. Then this square is the line. If we hold it, the people will see. If we fall, they'll think the enemy owns their streets again. Rafi adjusted his grip on the radio pack. We're short on ammo. Reinforcements are half a day away, maybe more. The words cut like glass, but Amara didn't flinch. She stepped onto the cracked fountain's edge, her boots scraping against stone, and looked at each of them in turn. They have machines, they have numbers, but what they don't have is what we carry. This square isn't just stone, it's every family hiding in these buildings, waiting to see if we can outlast the night. We don't hold for ourselves, we hold for them. The team didn't answer with words. They simply nodded, tightening straps, checking magazines, shifting weight into positions of readiness. The hours bled slowly. From vantage points carved into ruined storefronts, Amara's squad watched the North approach. She crouched near Ellis, who had set his sniper against the frame of a broken window. The barrel pointed toward an avenue once bustling with markets, now nothing but blackened shells of carts. "They'll come armored," Ellis murmured, keeping his eye on the scope. "The way they always do, heavy carriers, drones overhead, infantry behind." Amara set her jaw, "And they'll think that's enough." It began with the hum, low, mechanical, rising like thunder before a storm. Shadows stretched across the avenue as armored transports rolled forward, steel beasts crawling over broken roads. Above, drones glided in circles, lenses glinting in the sun like the eyes of vultures. Amara pressed her hand to her earpiece. "Positions. Quiet until the third carrier crosses the line. Then we strike." The squad lay hidden in fractured glass and dust. Their breathing slowed, hearts beating in rhythm with the earth, trembling beneath advancing treads. Amara's finger hovered near the trigger, but her thoughts wandered, not to the enemy, not to death, but to the little girl she had seen yesterday, clutching her mother's hand in the cellar of a ruined bakery. Wide eyes, too young to understand war, yet old enough to feel fear's weight. That child was why she stood here, why she refused to break. The third carrier groaned forward, its shadow falling across the broken fountain. Amara gave the signal. In a single motion, the square erupted. Rockets launched from concealed positions, streaking fire into steel. The first carrier blossomed into flame, its bulk splitting as the explosion cracked its armor apart. Drones spiraled from the sky as Ellis' sniper rang out, one after another collapsing in showers of sparks. Karim and Rafi opened with rifles, cutting down infantry before they could fan out. Amara surged forward, her rifle barking, each shot measured, each breath steady. The enemy recoiled, surprised by the ferocity of resistance. But the fight was only beginning. The enemy pushed harder, flooding the avenue with troops. They swarmed like a tide, overwhelming in number, surging against the squad's thin line. Amara shouted over the roar, her voice carrying like a beacon. "Hold the square, don't give them one stone." Grenades clattered, fire burst. The fountain cracked under impact, shards flying. Karim was thrown back by a blast, his arm cut by shrapnel, but he rose with a snarl, refusing to drop his weapon. Ellis called targets, his voice calm despite the bleeding wound in his shoulder. Every shot he took cleared space, buying seconds for the others. Rafi kept the comms alive, radioing for reinforcements, though static answered him each time. The square became a furnace, smoke and fire mixing with the cries of war. Still, Amara stood firm. Her rifle ran dry, she switched to sidearm. When her sidearm emptied, she seized a fallen soldier's weapon and kept firing. She moved with a rhythm born not of training, but of conviction, the unshakable knowledge that surrender here would break more than walls. And then silence. The first wave shattered. The enemy pulled back, retreating behind their crippled carriers. The square lay scarred but not broken, its defenders bloodied but alive. Amara dropped to her knees beside Karim, checking his wound. "You'll live," she said firmly, though her hands trembled. Karim smirked weakly, wasn't planning on leaving anyway. For a moment the world slowed. The sun dipped lower, painting the smoke in gold. They had survived, but Amara's heart knew this was not the end. Night came heavy. The squad regrouped in the shadows of broken walls. Ammunition lay in scattered piles, too little to last another assault. Ellis' face was pale, but his hands never stopped cleaning his rifle. Rafi leaned against a column, radio still hissing with static. Karim dozed in pain, his bandaged arm held close. Amara paced. Every sound in the darkness clawed at her nerves. The enemy was still out there, gathering strength, waiting for the right moment. She closed her eyes, inhaling smoke and dust, and whispered a vow to herself. "If I must fall tomorrow, I will fall standing, but I will not let them take this place, not while my heart still beats." She moved among her team, her voice steady despite the weight pressing on her chest. Tomorrow they'll come again, harder, maybe with everything they've got, but we won't face them as soldiers only. We face them as guardians of every voice too afraid to cry out. Let them bring fire and steel. We'll answer with flesh and spirit does not burn. Ellis gave a weary grin. You always did know how to make dying sound noble. We're not dying, Amara said. We're teaching them that life has a cost they cannot pay. The team fell silent, letting her words sink deep. Around them, the city's shadows stretched, cloaking their fragile line. Beyond, the enemy regrouped, preparing for one final strike. The square was more than rubble now. It was the last barrier between despair and hope. And Amara, with her scarred rifle and bloodied hands, was its unyielding heart. The night had not ended when the drums began. They were not drums of music, but the pounding rhythm of armored treads and mechanized feet, rolling closer with each second. From the North Avenue came the glow of headlights, harsh beams slicing the smoke. The enemy had gathered everything they had left, determined to tear the heart out of the square in one decisive blow. Amara stood in the broken fountain, the cracked stone her pedestal. Her hair clung to her face with sweat, her uniform stained with dust and blood, but her spine was straight. She gripped her rifle like a staff, her eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 unspoken promises. Her squad moved into position. Ellis perched high on the remnants of a shattered building, his sniper resting across twisted metal. Raffi crouched near the radio set, listening to nothing but static yet refusing to abandon hope of reinforcements. Karim, though weakened, tightened the strap around his wounded arm and forced himself upright, a grenade launcher heavy in his other hand. The enemy came like a flood. Carriers rolled forward, their engines growling, armored plates gleaming beneath searchlights. Infantry poured in behind them, shadows advancing in waves. Above, drones circled like steel vultures, their lenses glowing crimson against the night. For one fragile moment, silence stretched between the two sides, the defenders small and few, the attackers vast and relentless. Then the world tore open. The first strike was theirs. Missiles streaked from the carriers, slamming into the square. The fountain cracked further, shards exploding outward as fire swallowed its edges. Walls collapsed, dust clouds rising like thunder. But Amara did not waver. She raised her rifle and roared, a single cry that pierced through the chaos. Hold the line. Her voice was not just a command. It was a vow. It was a signal to every hidden soul in the city, every child pressed against cellar walls, every mother clutching her family in silence. It was the promise that they were not abandoned. Karim fired his launcher, the blast hurling a carrier into flames. Ellis, rifle cracked from above, each shot carving holes in the advancing tide. Raffi grabbed his rifle at last, abandoning the useless radio and joined the fight, covering Amara's flank. The enemy pressed forward, step by step, gun by gun. The square became a crucible. Bullets screamed, grenades burst, and fire rolled through the air. Amara moved like a storm, her weapon singing in her hands, her every breath sharp and deliberate. When her rifle emptied, she swapped to sidearm. When her sidearm ran dry, she pulled a knife and pressed forward through smoke and shadow. Karim staggered but held, firing until the launcher itself cracked from heat. Ellis bled from a fresh wound on his forehead, yet never missed, his hands steady as the city crumbled beneath him. Raffi fought at Amara's side, his face set with a resolve she had never seen before. But numbers had their price. Drones swarmed, infantry surged closer, carriers kept rolling despite fire and fury. The enemy was relentless, their power overwhelming. For the first time, Amara felt her knees falter. She fell behind cover, chest heaving, vision swimming in smoke. Around her, the world blurred between firelight and shadow. She thought of that little girl again, the one with wide eyes in the bakery cellar. The image burned into her heart. No, she whispered, Her voice trembled, then strengthened. Not while they're still watching, not while hope is still alive. She forced herself up. The enemy broke through the first perimeter. Troops flooded the fountain, clashing with Amara and her team at arm's reach. The square became a battlefield of hands and steel, where blades flashed and gun butts struck, where blood met stone. Amara fought like a shadow, her knife flashing, her strikes born not of training but of desperation. Every movement was survival, every survival a defiance. Karim fell to one knee, his strength failing, but before an enemy could finish him, Amara's blade struck true. She pulled him to his feet, dragging him behind cover. Ellis' position collapsed beneath bombardment. He tumbled from the ruins, his rifle still clutched in bleeding hands, and fired from the ground, crawling into the square itself. Rafi's weapon clicked empty. He swung it like a club, buying seconds as drones swooped overhead. Sparks rained down as his body shielded Amara from a strike. Still the enemy pressed. Then the sound changed. Not the sound of machines, not of war, but of voices. From the alleys and shadows of the city, figures emerged, civilians. The people, armed not with rifles but with what they could find. Pipes, old hunting weapons, stones gripped tight in trembling fists. They had heard Amara's cry. They surged into the square, their shouts rising above the clash of steel. Not trained, not armored, but unbroken. They fought with desperation, with fury, with the will of those who had nothing left to lose but chains. The enemy faltered. For every soldier that advanced, 3 civilians struck back. For every drone that dove, stones shattered its lenses. Amara's heart leapt. She climbed the fountain again, raising her rifle high though it was empty. "Stand with me," she cried. "This is our square, this is our home." The square ignited with their roar. The battle dragged through the night. Wave after wave crashed and broke upon the defenders, now multiplied by the courage of the people. Fire spread through the streets, smoke choking the stars, but the square held. Amara lost track of time, lost track of wounds, lost track of her own breath. All she knew was the rhythm of resistance, the pulse of hearts beating beside her, the unshakable truth that they would not yield. When the final carrier burned, when the last drone fell from the sky in a shower of sparks, when the enemy's retreat echoed through empty streets, the square fell silent. The dawn rose. Amara stood at the center, her body trembling, her rifle heavy in her hands. Around her, the square lay in ruins, but it was theirs. Karim sat against a wall, pale but alive. Ellis limped, his face streaked with blood but his eyes bright. Rafi leaned on broken stone, his chest heaving, his radio at last carrying the faint crackle of reinforcements on their way. The civilians stood too, bloodied, bruised, yet victorious. They had come not as soldiers, but as a tide of spirit that no empire could crush. Amara looked at them all, her heart breaking and mending at once. The price had been heavy. The scars would never fade, but hope had survived. And hope, she realized, was stronger than any weapon. The sun climbed higher, painting the smoke in gold. For the first time in too long, the city breathed without chains. Children stepped from hiding places, mothers held their families, fathers stood with tears streaking through ash. The square was no longer a battlefield, it was a monument. Amara, standing in the fountain's shadow, whispered the words that had carried her through every night. "We did not fall." She lowered her rifle at last, not in surrender but in victory. The last barrier had held, and from its ruins a new dawn began.